Welcome back to Chapter 8 of Atlas Shrugged. And if you made it this far, if you finished the chapter, you are officially 20% done with the book. So congratulations on that. All right. So Chapter 8 is called the John Galt Line. And that's exactly what it says it is. We're going to be focusing this chapter on the railroad. And Dagny's putting it all together pretty nicely. And Eddie Willers is running Taggart Transcontinental as vice president of operations in her place, even though she's really running it while building her John Galt line. He's kind of obviously the front man for her. And he's doing a pretty good job. He's facilitating what she wants. And he's not really allowed to be seen in the below decks in the cafeteria where he likes to have lunch. So he sneaks down there and he talks to the guy who's usually down there, who I started to wonder, is the guy he's fond of in that cafeteria who listens to all of his stuff, John Galt? Could that be he's just getting all this information from Eddie Willers all the time about Dagny and all this stuff? So Eddie Willers is just talking to this guy and he's just giving him paragraphs of information. We don't ever hear this other guy talk. We just hear Eddie talk. And so he says, what is it we hear over the telephone? Sound vibrations, isn't it? Well, her voice sounds as if it were turning into light vibrations, if you know what I mean. She enjoys running that horrible battle single-handed and winning. Oh, yes, she's winning. So we're going from sound vibrations to light vibrations. Rand is drumming home this cosmic ray thing. She introduced us to Robert Stadler, who heads the Science Institute, and he studies cosmic rays, right? And she compares Rearden to a ray of light. And she's always going on and on about the light rays and the green and the blue and the different colors associated with the different planetary forces and energies, these manifestations of consciousness, of which Saturn's playing a big role here. And so she's playing around with that a lot. And I'd like to make, after part 1 is finished, I'd like to make a video about the cosmic rays. The United Locomotive Works went bankrupt. That's the best break we've had in the last few weeks, because their plant has been bought by Dwight Sanders. He's a brilliant young engineer who's got the only good aircraft plant in the country. He had to sell the aircraft plant to his brother in order to take over United Locomotive. That's on account of the equalization of opportunity bill. So again, nobody can own more than one business interest now because of the stupid bill that they passed. And so people are selling off their other business interests to family members and other people, right? People that they think they can trust or whatever it may be. So apparently this Dwight Sanders guy is going to do good because he's going to build some diesel engines. They're going to be able to run these trains really fast. Eddie Willers continues while talking to this guy. Why are they doing everything in their power to make it impossible for her to succeed? Referencing Dagny. There's something about it all that I can't define, and it's something evil. That's why I'm afraid. There's something guilty and sneaky about the whole place, talking about Taggart Transcontinental. Guilty and sneaky and dead. Taggart Transcontinental is now like a man who's lost his soul, who's betrayed his soul. So again, the cosmic rays, the planetary forces of consciousness coming into reality. And she's really playing around with, and has been for the last, 8 chapters, this concept of not having a soul and the purpose of matter, and people sort of vilifying one in favor of the other, or saying there is no soul. Man is just a bag of matter. She looked wonderful. She got windburned, talking about Dagny. The John Galt Line. I never asked her why she chose that name. A sort of challenge, I guess. So describing why Dagny chose the John Galt Line, even Eddie really doesn't know, but it is a challenge. She said she intends to beat or to fight John Galt, right? She told that to Danconia. So then we follow Dagny into her office, her new headquarters. 2 rooms on the ground floor of a half-collapsed structure. The structure still stood, unsafe for occupancy. Such tenants were half bankrupt, existing on the inertia of the momentum of the past. Everything that's in place now, it would seem, is just still going because it's like a car going around a corner. It's going so fast that it can't stop in time to avoid some sort of disaster. It's just going because it's already in motion. That's a very Taurian concept. That's the energy of Taurus. It's either, if anybody knows like a person who is a Taurus, who's got a lot of Taurus in their astrology chart, they're either going nonstop, or they're literally sitting and doing nothing. They are so prone to inertia. She liked her new place. It saved money. So there's that economical Saturn energy, not being wasteful. The tinged streaks of rain ran on the glass window at the wall of the building across the valley. So there's been a lot of play with rain in this chapter. She's going on and on, beating home this rain. It's almost like we're washing something away. We're being refreshed in some way. She had flown to New York unexpectedly, 20 minutes after hearing a brief item in a news broadcast. The radio voice had said that Dwight Sanders had retired from business, suddenly, without reason or explanation. So we just get this guy who's going to make diesel engines. That's a huge break for them. And now all of a sudden he retires without reason, just like McNamara did, who was supposed to be their chief contractor for the John Galt Line. So these people are randomly retiring without warning. Is somebody paying them off? Is, somebody telling them you better take money or else? Is it the Science Institute? Is it Danconia? Trying to undercut what's going on here. There were naked lights inside. The place looked abandoned and dead. So talking about the Taggart transcontinental baggage area, which means we're still discussing this energy of death and transformation. And it's naked because the naked lights we're stripping things down to their pure essence. She felt an emotion, a loneliness much beyond this moment. The loneliness of a gray wasteland, the loneliness of her childhood. And her childhood, she was kind of lonely and stuff because she couldn't find any competent people who matched her, resonated with her. And now she's separated from Taggart Transcontinental, where the energy really was for her. She felt as if she were in exile, never to return. So she feels like she's been cast out of her rightful place, right? Because she has, in essence. But she's also chosen to take this exile. She said, I'm going to leave. I'm going to do this. And I'm going to build a line, and you're going to play politics. So she really chose this path for herself. She did not know the nature of her loneliness. The only words that named it were, "This is not the world I expected." So yeah, she's finding out that the world's a lot more corrupt than she thought. With the Equalization of Opportunity bill and the anti-dog-eat-dog crap that they hit Dan Conway with, and the Phoenix Durango line with, and the politics that everybody's playing. There's nobody focused on production, nobody focused on reason and rationality. People aren't after the truth, they're after self-interest. When she was 16 at the Taggart track, the rails that converged like the lines of a skyscraper to a single point in the distance. She had told Eddie Willers, she had always felt as if the rails were held in the hand of a man beyond the horizon. Someday she would meet him. And so we're playing much more with this creator force, right? Where something holds the concept of these things. Something out in the distance, something at the edges, the vision, right? The distant vision, the hymn to a distant vision. This was a longing she had never permitted herself to acknowledge. She faced it now. She thought, if emotion is one's response to the things the world has to offer, if she loved the rails, the building, and more, If she loved her love for them, there was still one response, the greatest that she had missed, she thought. To find a feeling that would hold as their sum, as their final expression, the purpose of all the things she loved on earth. No, not Francisco d'Ancona, not Hank Rearden, a man who existed only in her knowledge of her capacity for an emotion she had never felt, but would have given her life to experience. So now they're comparing her love for all of these technological advancements, all of this, the totality of the railroad as a whole, and her love for the building of these things and the creating of these things. And she wants to almost personify it, to have an experience with the maker of that. And in this case, it's like she can't seem to find anybody who is that person yet. There was some unbreakable link between her love for her work and the desire of her body, as if one gave her the right to the other, the right and the meaning, as if one were the completion of the other, and the desire would never be satisfied except by being of equal greatness. She would never find it. Her own thought of what life could be like, well, was all she would ever have of the world she had wanted. Only the thought of it, and a few rare moments like a few lights reflected from it on her way, to know, to hold, to follow, to the end. So to the end is the unconscious or unknown reflecting back these unexplored parts of herself, I wrote. So she says, only the thought of it and a few rare moments like a few lights reflected from it on her way. And what is it? This emotion she had never felt, right? So in a few rare moments, like a few lights reflected from it, what is it? It's the thought of what life could be like, her thought of it, her concept of it. These lights, these moments are like lights reflecting off of that, sort of showing her that it's possible, but it's only a reflection. It's never the real thing. Outside her window, she saw the shadow of a man who stood at the door of her office. She felt no fear. She sat at her desk motionless, watching in blank wonder. His shadow swung like an irregular pendulum across the pavement, describing the course of a soundless battle. It was a man fighting himself to enter that door or to escape. So I'm thinking, is this Rearden? He's at her door. You know, he's expressed sexual thoughts in the chapter before. Is he here to do something? They talk about an irregular pendulum, time, which also links up to Saturn. She wondered numbly, distantly, who was he? Had he watched her desolate loneliness as she was now watching his? They were alone in the silence of a dead city. He was a reflection of suffering without identity. She sat watching on the glistening pavement of a dark alley, the shadow of an unknown torment. So to glisten is to shine or to sparkle. And she's watching the shadow go back on this sparkly pavement, the shining pavement. So again, the shadow and the light. She's playing around with these two concepts. Then she leapt to her feet, urgent need to know his identity and motive. She threw the door open and looked out. The alley was empty. The pavement went tapering off like a band of wet mirror under a few spaced lights. No one in sight. She saw the dark hole of a broken window, an abandoned shop. Across the alley, streaks of rain glittered under a light that hung over the black gap of an open door, leading down to the underground tunnels of Taggart Transcontinental. So now we've got dark holes. We got a wet mirror. So she's playing around a lot with this concept. We saw Rearden, right, in a couple chapters prior at the party. His head was in a mirror. His wife was the reflection. Now all of a sudden we got this wet mirror, these space lights. We got this black hole. She's feeling this emptiness, this loneliness, this desolateness, because this part of herself that she can't experience with another person, you know, embodied outside of herself, that she wishes to have this physical experience with, is not manifest, and she doesn't believe she'll ever have it. And then we see the shadow figure. So I'm thinking Could this be Rearden? Even though she said it wasn't Rearden, it's not D'Anconia, so maybe it's not them. Maybe it's John Galt. The shadow's like a representation of her own loneliness, and the black hole's like the depth of, the abyss from which this feeling just like is perpetuated, just never ends. Rearden signed the papers. Paul Larkin, he said, "You know that I'll always consider these ore mines as yours." So now Rearden has to sign over his shop, not his shop, but some of his mines to Paul Larkin because he's not allowed to own more than one business interest. So Rearden says, "No, either I own a property or I don't." Larkin says, "But we made an agreement. You know that you can count on me." Rearden says, "I have never been at the mercy of anyone's word before. The mines are still yours, just as good as yours. You have nothing to fear. I'll..." And then he says, "Don't talk about it, just do it." So he's like, "Larkin, cut the crap, man. Like, I signed over the mines to you. You said I could trust you. Don't give me lip service. Either follow through and give me the crap when I need it, or don't. Why should you be angry, Hank? It's only a new form of legal red tape. Look at all the others. They don't mind. They're..." And then Rearden interrupts and says, "They're setting up stooges whom they control to run the properties extorted from them. Now, why do you want to use such words? I don't deal with cowards. The mines are yours. If you wish to give me first call on all the ore produced, you will do so. If you wish to double cross me, it's in your power." So Rearden's being straight with him, and he's pretty upset. I mean, he's got to sell his business interest to this guy because the government says so. Unsummoned, the picture of a face suddenly in his mind, the face of a preacher. So Rearden's been compared to a crusader. He now is seeing a face of a preacher. They've told him, and they've told us that he's, an ascetic. He's got this asceticism about him, which is, self-denial, this sort of Christian denial of the pleasures of the flesh so that you can go to some, Jewish utopia in heaven while, the actual Jews inherit the earth. It's nonsense. But he's kind of got that about him. But that's also a Saturnian quality. So we can't deny the fact that that's an energy taken to an extreme. And he's sort of representative of this Saturnian extreme. But at the same time, there are some real religious references. The slums remained in his memory, the righteous malice of the man's mouth, a small mouth stretched to yell into the darkness. So the preacher's not saying very nice things. And the things that the preacher's saying has the desire to harm another. The noblest ideal that man live for the sake of his brothers, that the strong work for the weak, that he who has the ability serve him who hasn't. And so I don't think Rearden likes those teachings very much. And the whole fact of comparing him to a crusader and comparing and talking about how, he denies the pleasures of the flesh and he doesn't have the balls to follow through with it and stuff like that. Maybe he's being mischaracterized, that other people are seeing an extreme in him where the energy is actually healthy. So basically, Rearden is discovering that he's got a real issue with Larkin after this. He's feeling something pretty bad. And he realizes that what he's feeling is hatred for Larkin. And he's like, I never really felt hatred because I just put my nose to the grindstone and worked. But now I know what it's like to hate. Like somebody comes in and just takes your shit and you don't have any say over it. You're supposed to love them. So Rearden thinks about himself back in the day, and he's thinking, back in the day, I would have stomped this guy out. Rearden knew what the boy he had been would have felt, a desire to step on the obscene thing which was Larkin and grind every wet bit of it out of existence. He had never experienced an emotion of this kind. This was what men called hatred. So Yeah, he's pretty pissed. And then they go on and talk about how he sold another mine to another guy, and the guy was very grateful, wanted to give him a rebate. So he wanted to give him coal at cost. Cost is basically just when you're reading this, so cost is what the person who gets it for, like the wholesale price, not the marked up price. So yeah, that's how he kind of wanted to rebate him, was like, I'm gonna, because you're selling me this mine. And Rearden's like, no, charge me out the wazoo, but just give me the coal. Rearden wondered why he heard no word from Wesley Mouch. His calls to Washington remained unanswered. Then he received a letter. Mr. Mouch was resigning from his employ. Wesley Mouch had been appointed assistant coordinator of the Bureau of Economic Planning and National Resources. So Wesley Mouch sold him down the river. He was pretending to represent his interests in Washington. Now he won't call him back. And now he's got this cushy Bureau of Economic Planning and National Resources coordinator job. Of course, Wesley Mouch was at that meeting with James Taggart when they talked about creating progress in Washington and having good friends and anti-dog eat dog rules and having no monopolies, but getting rid of competition, unbridled competition, which means basically having a monopoly. As long as it's your monopoly, then it's okay. There's an unspeakable evil in the world. You know it, and it's no use dwelling on the details of it. Don't let it win. So Rearden's trying to convince himself, don't worry about this bullshit. Just keep going. Rearden Metal Bridge, the first shapes of green-blue metal, glittered in the first rays of the spring sun. Within a few weeks, the blinding stabs of hatred ceased and did not return. So starting to build the bridge is helping to soften his heart a little bit and getting that going. And the sun is sort of doing its work. This is, the 7 steps of Saturn, right, is to the throne of the sun. So building this bridge, we can start to see how we're coming up to, the promised land here a bit. And it's making dealing with all this commie crap a little less painful. There was no hint suggesting a victim in Rearden's bearing. The spring sunlight of early morning sparkled on the windows of the city. The sky was a very pale blue that seemed young. The offices were still closed, and the city did not look as if it held malice, but as if it were joyously, hopefully ready to swing into action in the same manner as Rearden. So more sunlight. I mean, she starts to mention sunlight a lot. There's a thawing out of the coldness. That is Rearden. There's a thawing out of the cold, icy nature of Rearden, but also the cold, icy nature of the world. It's all happening simultaneously. We're entering into spring and into summer, right? The dressing gown he wore was of dark blue flannel. So Rearden's having a meeting with Eddie Willers, and he's wearing dark blue, the sky blue, the dark blue. So we're shifting over to a blue energy, which we'll go over when we go over the cosmic rays. He found himself enjoying the stiff freshness of the white tablecloth and the sunlight sparkling on the silver, on the 2 bowls of crushed ice holding glasses of orange juice. And Rearden asked Eddie Willers, what's the financial state of Taggart Transcontinental? Is it desperate? And Eddie Willers says, worse than that, Mr. Rearden. Do you know that your first payment for the Rearden Metal Rail is due next week? Yes, I know it. Let's agree on a moratorium. So he gives Eddie Willers, he gives Taggart Transcontinental a break, a delay. And Eddie's through the roof because he just went there to meet with Rearden. He wasn't expecting that. And he's, extremely glad that they're going to get a break on this thing and finally be able to afford to stay in business for a while because things are pretty bad. And Rearden basically tells him it's in his interest, to give them a break because his interests are linked up with Taggart Transcontinental. And Eddie says, I still owe you thanks, Mr. Rearden, for something much greater than clarity. But I think it's horrible that Jim Taggart should benefit too, that you should be the one to save him and people like him after they, Rearden laughed. Eddie, what do we care about people like him? We're driving an express and they're riding on the roof, making a lot of noise about being leaders. Why should we care? We have enough power to carry them along, haven't we? So he's kind of back to that sunny disposition about, screw them. Let's just keep moving forward. Maybe not the wisest move, and maybe this is what D'Anconia has been talking about, right? Is like you keep bailing these freaking slime balls out, and they're gonna keep pulling their crap. They're not gonna learn their lesson. And maybe this is why D'Anconia can't help Dagny with her interests, because maybe that's why they're enemies to begin with. And also maybe we're seeing why Dagny has been linked with the word astonished and the open astonishment of the fool card, because there's such a childlike quality to all of their actions. They're so excited to go out and explore that they forget that some of their actions to benefit people like James, or a system that is openly suppressive, by creating progress for them, doesn't allow the elimination of them. You just keep supporting people who don't deserve it. The summer sun made blotches of fire on the windows of the city and glittering sparks in the dust of the streets. So now we're in the summer. Things have definitely thawed out. To the knowledge of the public, the tank trains moved as silently as rays, and as rays, they were noticed only when they became the light of electric lamps, the heat of furnaces, the movement of motors. But as such, they were not noticed, they were taken for granted. So she's like, nobody's thinking about these things. Silently as rays, and as rays, they were not noticed. So just like rays of the sun, it's not noticed till it's converted into plant energy and you eat it, or to an animal's body where you eat the animal. So you don't really realize these things, and the public takes it for granted, but they see it and notice it when it becomes, the lamplight or something. But nobody wants to think about how that lamp is being lit, how that furnace is being lit. Then it mentions social conscience, which is like a Saturn type of deal. Reason, Dr. Pritchett had told them, is the most naive of all superstitions. So now all these newspapers, all these media companies are talking a whole bunch of crap about the John Galt Line, about Taggart Transcontinental, about Rearden Metal. They're just doing hit piece after hit piece. And Dr. Pritchett says, reason is the most naive of all superstitions. So reason, the ability to think or form judgments, right, is now somehow simple and is a belief based on fear. It's a naive superstition. This guy is toxic as hell. So if it's a naive superstition, then making good judgments, just doesn't matter. It's just a false belief based on fear. You don't need good judgment. The source of public opinion, said Cloud Slagenhop, there is no source of public opinion. It is spontaneously general. It is a reflex of the collective instinct coming from the collective mind, so of the collective mind. So now it doesn't really matter what the public thinks, because they basically will just follow suit. It's just general. Orrin Boyle gave an interview to the Globe, the news magazine with the largest circulation, the subject of grave social responsibility of metallurgists. One should not, it seems to me, use human beings as guinea pigs in the launching of a new product. So like the COVID thing, the COVID jab, right? Use human beings as guinea pigs in the launching of a new product. That's what's happening now. They're using that to get people afraid to take the Rearden Bridge. They use the virus to get you afraid enough to take their experimental thing. So they just use fear on either side of the aisle, right? They want you to be afraid to take the bridge. They want you to be afraid and take the vax. So I don't say that the bridge will collapse, said the chief metallurgist of Associated Steel on a television program. I just say that if I had any children, I wouldn't let them ride on the first train to cross that bridge. It's only a personal preference, just because I'm overly fond of children. So I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm just going to, say I won't do it. And I'm the expert. So you don't have to follow me. it's just all this manipulation of the public opinion. I don't claim that the Rearden Taggart contraption will collapse, wrote Bertram Scudder in The Future. The future is the magazine. Maybe it will, and maybe it won't. The important issue is, what protection does society have against the arrogance, selfishness, and greed of two unbridled individualists whose records are conspicuously devoid of any public-spirited actions? These two apparently are willing to stake their lives of their fellow men on their own conceited notions about their powers of judgment against the overwhelming majority opinion of recognized experts. Should society permit it, if that thing does collapse, it won't be too late to take precautionary measures. I mean, won't it be too late to take precautionary measures? Won't it be like locking the barn after the horses escaped? It has always been the belief of this column that certain kinds of horses should be kept bridled and locked on general social principles. So again, using fear to control society. Won't it be too late if, you get the Rona and you die? Won't it be too late if you go on the bridge and it collapses? Won't it be too late? So they just use all this BS. And then there's a committee of disinterested citizens who tries to get a petition to delay the opening of the John Galt Line. Disinterested. The consideration it got was respectful because it came from people who were disinterested. So it's better not to be interested than it is to be interested. No space was given by the newspapers to the progress of the construction of the John Galt Line. No reporter was sent to look at the scene. The general policy of the press had been stated by a famous editor 5 years ago. There are no objective facts, he had said. Every report on facts is only somebody's opinion. It is therefore useful to write about facts. Useless to write about facts. A few businessmen thought that one should think about the possibility that there might be commercial value in Rearden metal. They undertook a survey of the question. They did not hire metallurgists to examine samples, nor engineers to visit the site of construction. They took a public poll. 10,000 people, guaranteed to represent every existing kind of brain, were asked the question, would you ride on the John Galt Line? The answer overwhelmingly was no, sirree. Of course, this is what they do with polls nowadays, right? Same thing. So they're taking polls from just random people of the public who have no idea about what's actually going on. And these people are coming back with the conclusion that all these newspapers want, which is, I would never ride on that thing. I would never cross that bridge on that train. And, all this other nonsense. No voices were heard in public in defense of Rearden metal. The stock of Taggart Transcontinental was rising on the market, almost furtively, so stealthily, sneakily. There were men who watched and played safe. Mr. Mowen bought Taggart stock in the name of his sister. So this is the switch guy who wouldn't frickin' do the switches in Rearden metal and made her go find someone else to do it. He's buying stock. Ben Neely bought it in the name of a cousin. So Ben Neely's the guy who resigned as the contractor or the engineer. And Paul Larkin bought it under an alias. I don't believe in raising controversial issues, said one of these men. So all these people are, using wives, husbands, whoever, to buy stock of this company because they secretly believe in it, but they don't want to admit it publicly. James Taggart heard a rumor that some bridge girders had split and crashed, killing 3 workmen. So these girders, these things that are going horizontally to support the bridge. And she uses girders a lot to... Ayn Rand uses the girders a lot descriptively. The way I'm seeing it is to represent the horizon, right? Dagny said at the end of those rails, there was somebody held those things in their palm of their hand, a man on the horizon. She wanted to meet that man. And now there's these girders, the horizon and the sun. So when James Taggart heard that 3 men might have been killed by these girders, his mouth moved. His eyes had the unfocused look of panic, yet his mouth moved suddenly into almost a smile, and he said, I'd give anything to see Henry Rearden's face right now. When he heard that the rumor was false, he said, thank God. But his voice had a note of disappointment. Oh, well, said Philip Rearden to his friends. Maybe he can fail too once in a while. Maybe my great brother isn't as great as he thinks when he heard the same rumor. So, wow, what jerks. This is what I mean about supporting these people. This is probably going to come back later on in the book, right? Dan Cunya's going to have to reveal, like, you kept bailing these people out. You've only enhanced their interest because while they were shitting on you, you worked for them. And then you sold your John Galt line back to them. And you could just see how this is probably going to be a problem, as great as all this is. So then Lillian basically says some broads, at the club or whatever or wherever said, you were sleeping with Dagny, you were having an affair with Dagny. And I told them that she's basically a man. And even if you had the sack to do it, you wouldn't choose her. And Rearden was like, didn't really say much, but they threw that in there. They threw that in there how Lillian was like, Dagny, is basically a dude. Why would you want to sleep with her? And you don't have the guts. Always taunting this man. Now, multiple chapters where she's taunted him and said, you don't have the courage to cheat on me. I mean, and that's kind of a funny thing to call it, right? Like, she doesn't give him credit for having courage to not cheat on her. She's busting his balls and trying to like goad him into it almost. So Dagny laughed. The undercurrent of enjoyment was constant within her. Her teeth were very white against her sun-scorched face. So they just keep beating home the sun. In the summer days, a lonely man or woman would see in a newspaper a brief mention of the progress of the John Galt line. They felt the moment sparkle and wondered why it made their own problems seem easier. So yeah, people are secretly excited by progress. It's not happening every day. And real progress, not, progress, communist progress in Washington. We're talking about people are secretly excited about development, production, things actually being done in the world by men and by tools and through muscle, basically, through brains and through brawn. Unknown to everyone, freight was rolling in and orders for cars were piling up for the first train to run on the John Galt line. The first train would be a freight special. The freight came from all over the country. No one wrote about these shippers because they were the men who were not disinterested. So I like that. They basically are saying you have to not be interested in order to get any sort of coverage. She threw that right in their face. Now, July 22nd is like the solstice, right? Not the solstice, it's the beginning of Cancer, rather, right? And that's when they're launching the John Galt line, which I thought was pretty interesting because Cancer is the sign where we get back into the spirit. The sun is strong in the northern hemisphere. It's summer. It's hot, right? And all of a sudden, they're going to launch this line on July 22nd, the line between the end of Cancer and the beginning of Leo. Well, it's like this, Miss Taggart, said the delegate of the Union of Locomotive Engineers. We're not going to allow our men to run your train. Who's decided it? The committee. What you're doing is a violation of human rights. It's always with the human rights, right? You can't force men to go out to get killed when that bridge collapses just to make money for you. Put it down in writing, she said. So she grabs a pencil, paper, whatever. She's like, put it in writing. We'll sign a contract to that effect. And he's like, wait, what? And she's like, you don't want to sign that contract? And he's like, no, why? She says, why not? Since you know that the bridge is going to collapse. He's like, she said, I know what you want. You want a stranglehold on your men by means of the jobs which I give them. And me by means of your men. You want me to provide the jobs and you want to make it impossible for me to have any jobs to provide. If you think that I need your men more than they need me, choose accordingly. If you know that I can run an engine, but they can't build the railroad, choose according to that. Now, are you going to forbid your men to run that train? Now, that was pretty badass. She just put him in his place, was like, I'm building a railroad. Can they do that? And she's like, I can drive the train, but can they build the railroad? That's a pretty good way of putting it. And so everything seems to be going well for her. She's putting people in their place. She's getting this shit done. She's coming out across all odds. She hurried across the street. She pulled the door open. So she was going across the Taggart because Eddie called her and he's like, listen, you better come to the office and see what's going on over here. The anteroom of the office was full. Men stood jammed among the desks against the walls as she entered. They took their hats off in sudden silence. Dagny, every one of them, he said. So all these men had volunteered to go on the train and test this new track of Rearden metal and go over that bridge. And they all volunteered, the whole company except for three people, and all across the country and those three people were like in prison or sick in the hospital or something. Thank you, she said. Most of the men had seen her many times. Looking at her as she raised her head, many of them thought in astonishment and for the first time that the face of their operating vice president was the face of a woman and that it was beautiful. Someone in the back of the crowd cried suddenly, cheerfully, to hell with Jim Taggart. The men laughed, they cheered, they broke into applause. So they compared her, they said the face of the company was beautiful. And beauty is the center on the Kabbalistic tree of the sun. So there's sort of like this reference between beauty, the sun, the sort of illuminating center of the tree of life. They drew lots for the run. Pat Logan, engineer of the Taggart Common and Nebraska division. Dagny said, wire Pat and tell him he's been demoted to a freight, she said. Oh, yes, tell him that I'm going to ride with him in the cab of the engine on that run. An old engineer beside her grinned and said, I thought you would, Miss Taggart. So Dagny reveals, I'm going to go over that bridge. I'm not just going to let you do it. It's going to be my skin on the line, too. If we all go down, I'm going down with the ship. And then Dagny calls a press conference and invites Rearden to go to it, too, because she's like, finally, we got the whole line ready. We're going to launch this crap. I'm going to tell the press. And so she's sitting there wearing dark blue. So again, more of the blue is coming into focus here. The blue of the sky, the dark blue of the clothes that she's wearing. And her manner was severely dignified, just a shade too dignified. Rearden sat in a corner of the room. His manner was pleasantly informal, just a bit too informal. Well, what I want to know, as Bertram Scudder stated, is what protection do we have against your line being no good? Don't ride on it, she says. So she was busting their beans. Another asked, aren't you going to tell us your motive for building that line? I have told you the profit which I expect to make. And this kid's like, whoa, you don't mean that. You don't mean that. You mean like you want to make everybody money. And she's like, why, yes, if you wish me to clarify, the average profit of railroads has been 2% of the capital invested. An industry that does so much and keeps so little should consider itself immoral. So basically she's saying we need to make more money, not less. As I have explained, the cost of the John Galt Line in relation to the traffic which it will carry makes me expect a profit of not less than 15% on our investment. Of course, any industrial profit above 4% is considered usury nowadays. I shall nevertheless do my best to make the John Galt Line earn a profit of 20% for me, if possible. That was my motive for building the line. Have I made myself clear now? So she's like, I'm producing something. I expect to get paid for something. That's the point. That's how it works. There needs to be an incentive for me down at the end of the road, right? So the reporter's like, do you want us to quote all the things you said? And she's like, I hope I may trust you to be sure and quote them. She paused, then dictated, Miss Taggart says, quote, I expect to make a pile of money on the John Galt Line. I will have earned it, close quote. Thank you so much. So I thought that was pretty funny. She's letting them know, I'm in industry. I'm producing shit you can't. I expect to be paid money that you won't. That's the way it works. The first train at 4 p.m. on July 22nd will be a freight special of 80 cars, driven by an 8,000 horsepower 4-unit diesel locomotive. It will run nonstop, an average speed of 100 miles per hour. So this first train, right, is going to be an 80 car. So that's an 8. It's going to be 8,000 horsepower. So another 8, right? 4-unit diesel locomotive. We know that the bridge itself cost $800,000. The original estimate. He had changed it, so it probably costs less. Rearden's been married for 8 years, right? 8 is a pretty special number. And at the end of part 1, I'm going to try to break all this down because this would just delay the breakdown of the chapter itself to go into all that. But shouldn't you cut the speed below normal? Don't you have any consideration, whatever, for public opinion? She says, but I do. If it weren't for public opinion, an average speed of 65 miles an hour would have been quite sufficient. So basically, screw public opinion. Miss Taggart asked Rearden, why didn't you mention that I'm going to ride in that engine too? She looked at him across the room, and for a moment they were alone, holding each other's glance. Yes, of course, Mr. Rearden. So they're having more moments. Was the shadow outside her office him and all this stuff? And now they're holding each other's glance, and he's been thinking dirty thoughts about her when they were working. So then they finally come to the day where it's time to get on the train. It's time to test this thing out. And so she sees him. Her senses had merged of shock and light, but perceived only a sensation of shock and light. So illumination. She's really beating this home. There's a lot of sun in this chapter. The sun is falling on everything. We're getting hit with the cosmic rays. And Rearden, he was the first person she saw, and she could not tell for how long a time he was the only one. High above him, she saw the letters TT on the silver front of the engine. There was distance and a crowd between them. But his eyes moved to her the moment she came out. So they're making eyes at each other. He's looking at her. She's looking at him. For the moment, there was no future. They had earned the present. Only if one feels immensely important, she had told him, can one feel truly light. Which I thought that was a pretty good quote. But again, the lightness of weight and then also the lightness of the light rays, and she's just really playing around with it. She looked at the crowd and she felt simultaneously astonishment that they should stare at her when this event was so personally her own, that no communication about it was possible. The sight of an achievement was the greatest gift a human being could offer to others. And I thought that was great. So to watch your child graduate, even though it's not your accomplishment, and in essence, is the best thing you could offer someone, to witness their accomplishment. The meaning of this day was as brilliantly, violently clear as the splashes of sun on the silver of the engine. So now we're combining the sun and the moon. These two alchemical forces, the conjunction of them coming together in unity. And this is, part of that process, the combining of the masculine and feminine forces. All men had to perceive it now. No one could doubt it, and she had no one to hate. Eddie Willers, for once, for this day and event, his title of vice president was real to him, and he carried it well. Dagny was dressed in blue slacks and a shirt. Well, Eddie, you're Taggart Transcontinental now. Yes, he said solemnly. He was looking at the sun on a diesel engine, but what he was seeing was the sun in a clearing of the woods and a 12-year-old girl telling him that he would help her run the railroad someday. So the sun on the engine is the same as the sun in the woods the day that Dagny had made her declaration that she was going to run this thing. So she had brought her creation to the table, the lunar, feminine, negative influence, merging with the solar principle, the masculine mind. Tell me, Miss Taggart, what's going to support a 7,000-ton train on a 3,000-ton bridge? One of the reporters asked. My judgment, she answered. The men of the press who despise their own profession were enjoying it today. A young man, twice his age, said suddenly, who looked twice his age, I know what I'd like to be. I wish I could be a man who covers news, which clearly, because we know the media just does not cover real news. They're covering things out of self-interest, working in concert with the government to cover up stories. The long line of boxcars stretched off into the distance like a spinal cord. So Leo rules the spinal cord and the heart. Miss Taggart, he called after. So this is a reporter who had thought of a question that she hadn't heard. Who is John Galt? We are, she answered. So she's now stealing this guy's identity, and that might come back to bite her in the butt later. But also, we are, meaning John Galt found Atlantis and he found the Fountain of Youth, and here we are creating this thing. The lights were green lights between the tracks. Where the rails turned, a green light stood at the curve, against leaves of a summer green that looked as if they too were lights. So the green ray of Saturn, we're seeing how she's she's reaping the harvest of her fruitful deeds, rather. She is harvesting her fruitful deeds. She's done good. She's built something. And Saturn is the energy that allows you to harvest that, to create it. The green-blue rails ran to meet them. The green plains. The motion was a smooth flight on a sustained impulse. It seemed strange that the green lights of the signals kept coming at them past every few seconds. So a lot of green to start this thing out, a lot of Saturn, a lot of that cosmic ray entering the picture. Logan, which is the engineer, had the ease of an expert. It was the ease of a tremendous concentration, the concentration of one's task that has the ruthless of an absolute. So, bam, that's Saturn energy right there. And again, when I say Saturn, I'm talking about a level of consciousness that the planet itself brings into reality, in which is represented in this book. There's a reason that the head of the Science Institute is studying cosmic rays. There's a reason she's writing about them. And there's a reason she's using the colors, which are in relation to the planets. Is she's trying to paint this picture and tell us about this energy. Saturn rules lawfulness and, action and reaction, cause and effect, concentration, and, staying very, very focused on something. So Saturn rewards a certain level of focus. You got to be focused to finish. And here's this conductor, the guy who's driving the train, is just like this embodiment of it as well. The telegraph wires rising and falling from pole to pole in an even rhythm, like the cardiograph record of a steady heartbeat written across the sky. So it's this as above, so below thing going on. What men have created below is a representation of the heart, of the divine heart. This cardiograph of these telephone wires. It was the security of being first, with full sight and full knowledge of one's course, not the blind sense of being pulled into the unknown by some unknown power ahead. It was the greatest sensation of existence, not to trust, but to know. So when you finally go out into the unknown, into the belly of the whale, so to speak, and then you come out with the treasure, the reward. When you go into the underworld of Pluto and then you emerge with the treasure. That treasure in this case is the creation. What was once unknown and unfamiliar, the belly of the whale, is now conquered and controlled, which is what Saturn's about, bringing the forces of nature under one's control, bringing the unknown into the known. It was a strange foreshortening between sight and touch, she thought, between wish and fulfillment, between the words clicked sharply in her mind after a startled stop, between spirit and body, first the vision, then the physical shape to express it. First the thought, then the purposeful motion down the straight line of a single track to a chosen goal. Could one have any meaning without the other? Wasn't it evil to wish without moving or to move without aim? Whose malevolence was it that crept through the world, struggling to break the two apart and set them against each other? So she's recognizing and thinking about the fact that you got to have a purpose, you got to have a vision, and you got to take action towards that purpose with concentration. You got to have an aim, right? And then you got to move toward it. You got to have spirit and body. You got to have soul and matter. Spirit and matter. Spirit and the physical side. They work together synergistically. And she's saying, why is the world trying to split these two up? One is the greatest expression of the other. She opened her eyes and saw that Rearden stood looking down at her. She felt her power of volition knocked out by some single dull blow that made her unable to move. So her will just is swept away the second Rearden starts putting the eyes on her. She did not want to think, but the sound of the thought went on. The row of rivets in the corner holding sheets of steel sealed together, who made them? So this rivet, this sort of bolt thing that goes into the hole, right? These pins that go into holes and hold metal together. So to me, that's just kind of like sexual reference, right? These rivets in the corner holding these sheets of steel together. Who made them? Well, Rearden steel, right? She looked at the sun, details of a truth she knew and had always known. The words for it were, it's so simple and so right. So she always knew that things should be so simple and so right, but then men get away from nature, which is like, we're really starting to get into this now. They were the sons of Taggart employees. They had come unsummoned to guard this train. So all as they're going down this whole railroad, people are already lined up everywhere at every mile marker to applaud them. They're lined up in the cities, in the houses, by the track, by the bridge, everywhere. When she grasped it, she burst out laughing suddenly with the abruptness of a cry. She laughed, shaking like a child. It sounded like sobs of deliverance. So she's being freed. She's being freed from all this structure and discipline. And finally, once the deed is done, you just have this weight lifted off your shoulders, the responsibility. The gray house is the movement of the sun from east to west. These men had climbed the hill to see a silver-headed comet. So the sun, silver, the sun, silver. They just keep going back and forth and back and forth. The sun and the moon. The coming together of the masculine and feminine force, which is going to culminate by the end of this chapter. So she's playing around with it. She glanced at Rearden. She turned away, realizing suddenly that she had been glancing back at him too often. She turned deliberately and glanced back. He was looking at her. He did not turn away, but held her glance coldly, with full intention. When she leaned on her arm against the windowsill, when she brushed her hair off her forehead, every movement of her body was underscored by a feeling, the unadmitted words for which were, is he seeing it? So she's wondering if she knows, even though doesn't need to be spoken out loud, that everything she's doing is like, I'm into this dude, I like this guy. With nothing to protect them but the small green beads of light. So again, the green lights. They flew toward a glowing arch in the green lights that were like the doorknobs of space. So at the end of Saturn is the last planet. Like, it's not the last planet, obviously we know now, but it's the original seven, the 7 days of the week. Saturn is Saturday. It's the last day before a new week, right? It's the Sabbath day in the Jewish culture. So she saw the passage of a silver bullet across the city, stopped still to watch it. The sun leaving them, just shutting out, twisted boulders streaming up and shutting out the sun, leaving them to speed up through a bluish twilight with no sight of soil or sky. So they're in an in-between, a liminal space. Twilight is an in-between. So then they're grinding down, the mountains open up and they're like flaring open like two wings at the tip of the rail, one wing green, the other reddish brown, made of naked rock. So that's clearly got a meaning, right? So she's really playing around with the colors, and very deliberately so. She saw the coils of green-blue rail unwinding behind them. So she goes into the engine room, and she starts thinking, to take the pounding violence of 16 motors, she thought, the thrust of 7,000 tons of steel and freight, to withstand it, the impossible feat performed by two strips of metal no wider than her arm. What made it possible? What power had given to an unseen arrangement of molecules, the power on which their lives depended, in the lives of all the men who waited for the 80 boxcars? She turned to the door of the motor units, escaped into the pounding of the engine's heart. For a moment, it was as if she were reduced to a single sense, the sense of hearing. She had wanted to see them because the sense of triumph within her was bound to them, to her love for them, the reason of the life work she had chosen. So these inventions, these creations, these engines were her reason for being, right? But she's gone to hearing now. That's a Saturn thing. Saturn rules the hearing. Silver skin, gray metal, green and red beads winking on panels. So all of these colors. In these giant shapes, aspects pertaining to the inhuman were radiantly absent, the causeless and the purposeless. Every part of the motors was an embodied answer to why and what for. So what's the purpose of this? These motors are the embodied answer. Like the steps of a life course chosen by the sort of mind she worshipped, the motors were a moral code cast in steel. They are alive, she thought. The rational connections made by that human mind which had fashioned any one part of them for the first time, they are alive, she thought, but their soul operates them by remote control. Their soul is in every man who has the capacity to equal this achievement. Should the soul vanish from the earth, the motors would stop because that is the power which keeps them going, not the oil under her feet, the oil that would become primeval ooze again. The power of a living mind, the power of thought and choice and purpose. So she's realizing that matter is purposeless without spirit, that all this logic and all this stuff fails to exist without the proper mind and the proper soul to connect it. And she's connecting the dots now, right? The sun on the silver train, the masculine, the feminine, the rational mind, the opening of the heart, the Leonian heart. She saw Rearden standing by the steps of the door to the cab. The beating within her was one with the beating of the motors, and she felt as if both came from him. So the motors are the purpose of her life. The beating within her and the beating of the motors is coming from Rearden. So I thought Rearden wasn't this dude who she was going to have this emotion she could never experience. The cliffs ahead were a bright liquid gold. The sun, they were going west and up toward the sun. The sky had deepened to the greenish blue of the rails as a fountain of gold stars against the darkening sky. Electric light, white and red, glowing low in the sky. Across the dark of a canyon, she saw the bridge of Rearden metal. So we're getting really close now. We're at the bridge. She's starting to see it. Green, blue, and glowing, ray of a sun, struck by a long ray of sunset. She heard the rising, accelerating sound of the wheels and some theme of music, heard to the rhythm of wheels, kept tugging at her mind, growing louder. Can you guess what that might be? It burst suddenly within the cab, but she knew that it was only in her mind, the Fifth Concerto by Richard Hallett. So this quintessential quintessence, the five, right? Earth, air, fire, water, spirit, the quintessential element. And there's the Fifth Concerto by Richard Hallett. Then the windows were too suddenly clear. The sweep of their downward plunge was carrying them up a hill. And Rearden said, that's that. So they go over the bridge and it's like, bam, that's it, done. Okay, that's that. We made it, done. Told you. We all told you. She was torn off the steps, swung through the air, and deposited on the ground. She could not believe that the young boy laughing in her face was Ellis Wyatt. So she makes it across this bridge. The bridge was always the symbol of masculine and feminine being bridged together. I said it in a couple chapters ago. And now here we are. The sun, the silver of the train, the masculine, the feminine, the different colors merging together, right? And then we have the ingenuity of man and machine being run by the soul and the mind, and one being the highest expression of the other. And now Ellis Wyatt has all this new respect from her. Do you think that you have your hands full now? Ellis Wyatt was saying. Well, wait till you see the process I've developed. It will be the cheapest oil ever to splash in their faces and an unlimited supply of it. That will make the biggest oil pool look like a puddle of mud. So he's looking into shale. So he found a process by which he could harvest the oil and get it out. And he wants Dagny to be able to take these trains to the next level so he can push it all out. And she's pretty pumped up. She's like, yeah, give me some time and I'll do it. And Rearden and Dagny are staying at Ellis Wyatt's house. He picked them up after the train got out, and they didn't really know. They didn't know that was going to happen. They had the Stone Age and the Iron Age, and now they're going to call it the Rearden Metal Age because there's no limit to what your metal has made possible. So Ellis Wyatt's just so amped up. He's just free as a bird here. And I guess it's just him and some Native American where he lives on these oil fields out there. He kind of lives out in the middle of nowhere. The moonlight seemed to drain sound as it drained color. So the night's winding down. I thought that was a pretty cool spot. The moonlight seemed to drain sound as it drained color. So there's the feminine receptive energy. Bringing in white and red. 3 small drops were green. At the foot of a white curve hung a webbed rectangle, which was the bridge. So this is how they're starting to describe Rearden and Dagny when they're getting dropped off back at their room. There's these oil derricks, and it's like angular tiers, which are a series of rows or layers, right, on whatever steps or platforms they're on in front of their rooms. Descended below, with shadows repeating the steel tracery of derricks. So derricks are the big metal things you see above oil fields, like the Houston Oiler thing, right? And crisscrossing sharp black lines on patches of glowing rock. So shadows repeating the steel tracery of the derricks. So the oil fields were repeating the shadows of the tiers, which Dagny and Rearden are standing above. A few lights, white and red, trembled far in the distance. 3 small drops were green, strung in a line along the Taggart track. Beyond them, at the end of space, at the foot of a white curve, hung a webbed rectangle, which was the bridge. So there's Rearden, there's Dagny, and they're standing out here alone. Wyatt just dropped them off at their rooms, separate rooms, but next to each other. And now here we get this description of how the tiers link up with the oil derricks, which link up with the railroad, which link up with the bridge that brought it all together. And I said this bridge was going to be a metaphor to their sexual life, right? And the look she saw on his face made her know for the first time that she had known this would be the end of the journey. Their glance intent with that which resembled hatred and pain. She was conscious of nothing but a silent convulsion that made her unable to breathe. Yes, Hank, yes, now, because it is a part of the same battle in some way that I can't name, because it is our being against theirs, our great capacity for which they torture us, the capacity of happiness. Now like this, without words or questions, because we want it. It was like an act of hatred, like the cutting blow of a lash encircling her body. She felt his arms around her. She felt her legs pulled forward against him, and her chest bent back under the pressure of his mouth on hers. So they're getting hot and heavy now. It just happened. Bang, like that. The impulse was struck. So they mentioned the bridge, and then it's right to the sex. She was laughing soundlessly in triumph, as if saying, I'm thinking of it for the pleasure of knowing that I brought you to this. He was not smiling. His face was tight. It was the face of an enemy. He jerked her head and caught her mouth again, as if he were inflicting a wound. He was holding her body against his, as if stressing his wish to let her know that she was now only a tool for the satisfaction of his desire, and his victory, she knew, was her wish to let him reduce her to that. So once again, and his victory, she knew, was her wish to let him reduce her to that. So she wants to let him be victorious. This isn't some like, oh, he's taking advantage of her. She's fully in line where I'm the feminine energy here, and I want this masculine force to dominate me, just like he wants, just like as bad as he wants to dominate me, I want to be dominated rather. Of my courage, of my work, of my mind, and my freedom, that is what I offer you for the pleasure of your body. That is what I want you to use in your service, and that you want it to serve you is the greatest reward I can have. So all of her courage, all of her work, all of her mind, all of her freedom, the fact that she can put these things into service. Now that is a very Saturnian thing, right? This Capricornian being of service to others is a noble thing. It's the greatest reward you can have, right? She knew that the lips she felt on her mouth were his, but in the rest of her, there was no distinction between his being and her own, as there was no division between body and spirit. So, did she finally find this emotional encounter that she was talking about before the shadow guy arrived? The steps down a course chosen in the courage of a single loyalty, that one must make one's own desire in every shape of its fulfillment. They had moved by the power of the thought that one remakes the earth for one's enjoyment, that man's spirit gives meaning to insentient matter. Man's spirit gives meaning to insentient matter by molding it to serve one's chosen goal. He heard the moan of her breath. She felt the shudder of his body in the same instant. So this is the masculine and feminine force coming together, merging as one. So you see what I was talking about here with the cosmic rays, the alchemical emergence of the sun and the moon, the silver of the train and the sun's rays. She really painted a poetic picture there. I mean, it was a lot of description, so you really got to be ready for this chapter. It's kind of a tough one to get through because it's just so much, girders and tears and, mountains flying open and banners and all this other stuff. Just a lot of description. But because it's so symbolical and I'm going to have to comb through it again and link up all these different things through all the chapters and present them to you in, a way that you can see the more occult or esoteric influence in this text. But right now, it's just good to know that these things are at play, they matter. And, everything was deliberate. The bridge in a few chapters ago was deliberate. A representation of them, revealing Rearden's sexual thoughts about her was deliberate. Revealing, throwing all this sort of interplay of cosmic rays and the difference between spirit and matter, and how matter gives the ultimate expression for spirit, and that the spirit needs to learn how to control and manipulate that matter to such a degree that they can mold it into anything they want to suit their goal. And that ultimately this is nature and spirit coming together. This is matter and soul coming together in harmony. It should be so simple and so right, as Dagny said. So yeah, it was kind of a different chapter as far as the pacing goes, but it's worth it to see her and Rearden get together. But I think with so much more of the book to go, I'm just thinking, what now? I mean, now she's got to build a line from ocean to ocean, which is what she told Wyatt she was going to do. And then after she builds this line from ocean to ocean, I mean, how much opposition is she going to get on that? Is she going to stay with Taggart Transcontinental after she finds out her brother's going to claim all the credit for this? Right? These guys are going to want credit for this. They're going to try to do something shady. And, I can't wait till Danconia comes back in and is like, I told you guys. Because I have a feeling Danconia knows a lot more of what's going on here and knows why, even though he wanted the line to succeed, he may not have wanted it to succeed and then go to James. So we'll see. We've got a lot going on here. A lot of thoughts. I will, like I said, try to break this down. I'm going to break down a Saturn book that I have in my astrological collection, in concert with this book right now. And then I'll use the information that I break down there to create a separate video to show you the influence of Saturn and the cosmic rays and all those things in this book. So I'll see you for chapter 9.